My guest supports women in stripping feminine narratives and taboos through cycle awareness and coaching. She is a mother of 3, a certified life and business coach, and menstrual cycle advocate. You can find her on Instagram or online at sarahmorden.com, where she has a terrific blog and courses that are dedicated to uplifting your heart and mind. My glorious guest is Sarah Morden, a.k.a. the Period Queen.
Woo, yes.
Who gave you that name?
My community.
Really?
Started referring to me as a period queen, and I thought, wow, this is not exactly where I thought my career was going to go, but hey, I love it.
So is it weird that, just me reading this is kind of like, it's not odd, but it's different from me, right? Because first I started with, my guest supports women in stripping feminine narratives.
I've never heard it like that, but I was like, oh, where's he going here?
But this is what I got from your website, right?
Yeah, 100%.
And so I was reading it, and I'm like, the reason why I wanted you on was because I am so, what would it be? What's the word? Lack of education, ignorant when it comes to women's cycles. And why would that be important? Well, because I have a wonderful partner and a stepdaughter. Mm-hmm. And so when I looked at your website, I know it's very focused with women, but I thought it would be neat for me to figure out and find out a little bit more about why it's important for me to be able to support Tiffany and my stepdaughter in making sure she has a healthy well-being when it comes to mind and body, right?
I love that you're in a place where you're open to talk about that and listen for that. And I think that's the cool thing with the direction that we're starting to go is around, like, we are starting to go into that direction where more people are asking questions and curious, and more men are curious about this as well. And I have 2 boys and a husband, and I talk very openly about this, right. And they're going to learn about it in their own way. But it's been really cool to see where they've gone in just their understanding around women and cycles and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, so thank you.
You're welcome. I've spoken with life coaches before, just in casual conversation, but no one has really mentioned a women's cycle to me, especially if it's a female coach. Mm-hmm. So what really motivated you to specifically go after the menstrual cycle?
Yeah, it's a good question, because I became a certified life coach 10 plus years ago. Mm-hmm. This was nowhere on my radar. I love the coaching model. I think every coach takes a slightly different approach. We have different niches, different expertise, but at the core of being a coach, the foundation of coaching is you believe your clients are creative, resourceful, and whole. Right. Like, you believe that your clients have the answer. You're not there to tell them the answer. You're there to hold the space for them so that they can do that self-discovery. So that's what coaching is. And about 5 years ago, I've been coaching women off and on in the corporate world, in my own private practice. And I was hearing more and more about hormones and women talking more and more about hormones. And I was doing my own wellness journey and kind of doing some of my own research around hormones specifically. And it just I started to do my own research. I'm a giant nerd. I like learning, like we talked about at the start of this. So I dive into all my books and my podcasts. And the more I learned about it, the more I realized, wow, these things called hormones really impact so much of what we do and how we operate. And yes, there's a lot of information, but there isn't a lot of information on how it impacts our day-to-day life. So for me, I was sitting there like, okay, yeah, there's a lot of information about hormone imbalance and how to balance your hormones naturally, but they're not really talking about, okay, how do hormones impact your relationships, your parenting, your motivation, mm-hmm. your self-love, your self-worth. And I became really interested in that side of things. And as I was coaching and kind of doing my own research, I started to bring it into my coaching a little bit, because I always noticed there was these beautiful women that I'd be speaking to, but it was almost like there was just something they were missing. Like, they were doing all the right things, but there was something that was missing. And so I started to put the 2 together, right, and realized that there is something missing. Like, we are operating as women in these very linear fashions because that's how we've been taught. But that's not how we're meant to operate. We're meant to operate in a more of a cyclical fashion. And when you can start to tap into that, so much more flow and ease can happen within your life. And so that's my really long-winded answer of it just kind of happened naturally, like talking to women and exploring this stuff. And I only teach what I practice. I only practice what I preach. I only teach what I practice. And so it just became a part of my coaching. And the more I talk to women, the more I realize, wow, there's something here, because so many women, like the feedback I would get would be, wow, I wish I knew this years ago. Like I had no idea. And so that's kind of how it started. And then ironically, around the same time, I ended up pregnant with my daughter.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember there just being a moment in time where I thought, we need to be having more conversation around this.
Right.
I want the conversation to change for her, for the next generation. And so it was kind of the combination of all that.
So with your daughter, how are you going to teach her to live in more a cyclical way versus the linear way that you said traditionally, women are kind of schooled in?
Yeah. I'm going to show her.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to show her through my actions and how I make decisions. And there is a teachable framework too. We think of our cycles as sometimes just period or ovulation, but there's actually so much more. There's 30 days where our hormones are doing vastly different things. Right. And just to like paint a really, really high level, if you will allow me to,
go for it.
I'm not going to go into total nerd mode and dive into all the hormones, although I could.
Okay.
But like a man's hormones, it operates within about a 24-hour time period, meaning you guys have little dips and peaks in your hormones, but they happen in 24 hours and then they repeat every 24 hours.
Really?
So it's very consistent. So operating in this linear fashion, this 24-hour, I'm a hand talker. Sorry.
It's okay.
This linear fashion is easy for a man because it's consistent 24 hours, where a woman's hormonal landscape spreads out over 28 to 30 days. So their dips and peaks in their hormones can be days, if not a week at a time. So it's a vastly different experience,
right,
with how women operate versus how men. And so you asked the question about my daughter. I'm going to speak to her about these things. I'm going to let her know that this is how we operate. This is how men operate. And we have the ability to tap into these beautiful superpowers and this beautiful way of living when we honor that. But when we try to cram ourselves into these boxes that we don't fit into biologically, or when we try to operate off this linear kind of playing field, the way we've really been taught from society for a long time,
right,
that's when we come up against certain tensions. And so, yeah, I'm going to talk about it. I'm going to show her, and I'm going to give her the space to explore it herself too, right? Like that's part of it.
You're great. You're a great parent. You're a great mom, because that's the best way to do it, I find, right? You can, because you also don't want to be, I'm always very aware that I don't want to be a hypocrite.
Yeah.
Right. So if you show, it's kind of backing up the fact that you might not be as hypocritical if you're asking them to do something or live in a way that you kind of aren't. Right. Mm-hmm. You mentioned superpowers, which I thought was interesting. I read that on your website, that it should be really something of empowerment. So explain how you look at it through the lens of it being a superpower.
Mm-hmm. I think with a lot of things in life, your mindset and how you approach something can make a huge difference, right, obviously, right? And so for many women, we think of our periods or our cycle as a bit of an inconvenience, like a monthly inconvenience. For many women, it can be very painful. There can be a lot of issues. And so it becomes this burden where it's, our hormones are our superpowers. A hormonal imbalance can be a burden, but our hormones are not the enemy. They do amazing things for us. And it's sometimes flipping that script and then understanding, okay, what are your hormones actually doing over those 30 days? And they do very different things, which means you have very different ways of approaching life over those 30 days. And you can, for example, in ovulation, when your estrogen and your testosterone have peaked, that's a beautiful time to do things like this. So AKA, that's where I am right now.
Right.
It's a beautiful time to have conversation, to put yourself out there, to be social, to be more outward. You actually communicate better. You're perceived better because there's a lot going on hormonally. You're more attractive at that time because think biologically what your hormones want of you is to procreate, whether you want that or not. So they're doing very different things during ovulation. So if I can sit back and say, oh, okay, well, yeah, this is a great time for me to record a podcast or to go out on a date with my husband tonight, then I'm tapping into that energy and it's not working against me, right? It's working for me. And so that becomes a bit of a superpower.
Mm-hmm.
But then come next week, I'm going to go more into this inward type of feeling because of what's happening with my hormones. And so if I then try to recreate this week, it's going to feel more forced. And that's where there's this friction sometimes of women thinking, oh, what's wrong with me? Like, I don't feel like I want to be out going on a date night right now, or I don't feel like I want to be doing a podcast. What's going on? And there's nothing wrong with you. It's just your hormones are doing certain things that are then making you feel like you want to go inward. But that's not bad, because there's a superpower there too. Because what if we turned our focus into ourselves and used it as a time to nourish ourselves, and use it as a time, you know, your fall is when your rose-colored glasses come off and you can really see the world for what it is, and you can make certain life adjustments. And there's a beautiful time to do certain things in that phase as well. And each phase operates that way. So that's what I mean by your superpowers, is you can really have your body and your hormones start to work for you versus against you. But you just have to kind of understand that cycle. Does that make sense?
Yeah, you know, the superpower thing is intriguing to me. I watched one of the movies that you had on your list of the top 5 yesterday.
Which one?
Turning Red.
Ah, yes.
You know, for us, it's amazing because it's based in Toronto, of course,
Yes.
right? Which is very cool.
Mm-hmm.
But secondly, because they were very, very wise the way they presented the story, and they used an Asian family as well. There's a lot of layers and complexity to the story, which I thought was interesting. Why is that movie so important?
It's a good question. I found it interesting. Like you said, I think there's a lot of layers.
Mm-hmm.
I, of course, zoned into the aspect of it, of the kind of analogy that runs through the entire movie around the turning red and the red panda, around your period and the hormonal changes that happen when you're around that age. And so I found it interesting because I actually heard a lot of controversy about it.
Really?
Before I even really knew a lot about it. Yeah, there was quite a bit of backlash, I believe, around the topic and whether it was appropriate for younger girls or boys to be watching the movie. And so I found that interesting. That's what intrigued me at first. And I thought, well, why are we uncomfortable with this? Because this is a normal part of our life.
Course.
And so I found that piece interesting. I loved that it was the first solo produced Disney movie from a female, the entire thing. And when she's been interviewed, she's talked a lot about how she wanted to bring this idea of your period and your hormones to the forefront. And so I think it's awesome that there's movies being made. I think it's awesome that I've talked to a lot of moms who have daughters who are around that 12 to 14 who have really enjoyed the movie.
Right.
And they're talking about it with their friends. And so I think, movies are an example of, oftentimes it's what's going on culturally and what's happening. So I thought it was just a really good representation of girls and what they're going through at that age, with many other layers on it, right? Like you said. So, healing generations before us. Like
Right.
I don't mean to go off on like a side tangent here, but there's been a lot of research around intergenerational trauma and how certain experiences can be passed through your DNA, especially with women, because essentially I existed as an egg in my grandmother. So depending on what went in her life, my mother's life, my daughter's life, there's a lot of connection there. So there's really epigenetics. Epigenetics. It's a really cool topic.
Okay.
I talk a lot about that in relation to women and how they feel around their body, their periods. I mean, insert anything really.
Mm-hmm.
And so I talk about healing those generations, because our grandmothers and our great grandmothers were raised in very different environments, and we all have that experience. I mean, you could speak to that 100% as well. So I found that cool at the end, that they brought the different generations in. Right. And I thought there was a lot there. Maybe I was looking into it more than what the person who created it meant, but I thought there was some cool things there. So that I was just like, oh, this is fantastic. I'm so into this movie right now.
Well, listen, the part that got me was at the end, close to the end, when they're in that scene where they kind of, cross over to this world where there's bamboo. They're in,
Bamboo
and
forest,
the little
yeah.
girl's mom is crying, and she goes to
Yeah.
console the mom.
Yeah.
And I'm like, geez, that's one of those scenes that really touched me because, I've seen the dynamic with my mom and my sister, and then I thought of my dad, and like how amazing it would be if you could be there to console your parent in those vulnerable points of their life, especially early on. I always think, like, would I be my parents' friend if I was the same as them and I grew up with them? And I usually say, especially with my dad, for sure. But it was interesting to see with the mom and the daughter that the daughter went to console her, and that's where I kind of like,
Yeah, I think that's interesting too, because you have a really close relationship with your mom.
yeah, both of them I
Right.
had a pretty good relationship with my dad too.
Yeah. And you've probably seen your mom go through some difficult things.
Yes.
Right. So, and I can relate to that. Like we both lost our fathers. And my stepdad just passed away as well. So my mom's now widowed twice, and I've seen her walk through that. So I can see a connection to that part too of seeing my mom in a vulnerable position, because I think a lot of times as kids you don't always see your parent in that position, but what a beautiful thing too when you can step up and console and take care of them. So yeah.
Well, when I watch Up, I cry every time too.
Oh, Up's good.
Yeah. So for me, Up is the story of my mom and dad, and then Turning Red is the story of my mom and sister in a way.
Interesting.
Yeah. Would you like a beverage?
Sure.
Yeah, well,
What?
I have a beverage prepared for you.
I'm having flashbacks of my phone when I grew up.
Oh, you are?
Yeah.
This is totally the phone that I had when I grew
Yeah.
up. I called the wrong number. Can you believe that? It's on the wall.
Does it actually work?
Yeah. On the wall, I have to put the number there, otherwise I forget, because who knows numbers anymore? It says, for a great Buick, call 416. I'll spare you the number. Hi there. How you doing? Can you bring in a couple of beverages? Oh, fantastic. Thanks. Bye.
That actually works.
You can
Wow.
hear like screaming kids
Yeah.
in the background. I'm ordering a drink. That's love.
Oh, that is
Good
love.
woman.
That is
That's
love.
why I'm here talking to you.
She's a good woman, for sure. She is.
So tell me some of the things that it's really important to know, from the viewpoint of a woman when it comes to, what are like the crucial pieces that a woman should know about her cycle, and also what are the important things to know as a man, because when you're navigating things like a relationship especially, it's so important.
Yeah, I think one of the big pieces that we touched on is just understanding as a woman that we're cyclical and that we're not meant to feel the same each and every day. I think sometimes when you don't feel that consistency, you think something is wrong with you, but it's just the way our hormones work. And it's easier in many ways for a man to feel more consistent in how they feel, how they show up. I mean, I see it with Jeff and I, like, let's use working out as such an easy example. He can be really consistent with his workouts, right? He can show up most mornings. And I mean, there's lots of other external factors. So let's not say that you guys don't deal with certain things like that too.
All right.
Is this the drinks?
I hope so.
Yeah.
Do you need a straw?
I gotta come here more often.
You need a straw, or is it good without
No,
a
I
straw?
think I'm good.
You're fine?
Oh, yeah.
All right. Cheers.
Cheers.
All right.
Thank you.
I don't know. This is a Bloody Caesar.
Oh, yeah.
Of course, you're familiar with the Bloody Caesar, right?
This is really, did you do that on purpose?
No. Not at all.
Yeah, right.
Actually, funny enough, I had to go and do a Caesar presentation right after this. That's where I'm going. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah. This is my favorite.
Aw, look
Hey,
at
what's
you.
wrong?
Your celery.
Amazing.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm doing a Walter Caesar demo.
Well, thank you. I enjoy a good Caesar. So yeah, I was just, I'll get back here. I was saying that I think that's one thing, is that consistency, that we just operate differently, and that's okay. And with the working out example is, yeah, there's external factors that everybody deals with. So it's not saying that doesn't exist for males and females, of course. But from like at your core, biologically, it is easier for Jeff to wake up every single day, work out the exact same every single day. His body is okay with that. For a woman, your body, because of your hormones, it's doing very different things at different times. And so there's some times where, yeah, going and hitting the gym and doing weights is going to make a lot of sense. There's other times where slowing down and moving, more slowly and doing a yoga class is going to make more sense for your body. So hitting the gym the exact same way every single day, eating the exact same every single day just doesn't work as well for us biologically. We're meant to change it up.
Wow.
Within our cycle. And it makes a lot of sense when you start to go through certain things in your life. You're like, oh, I mean, sex. You want to know how to get a man's attention when we talk about this. This is a great example for flipping it on the other side for what a man should know. Is there's times in our cycle where we're very much, I call it our Beyonce phase. Our estrogen is rising, we're feeling good, we're feeling sexy, we're feeling confident, and that's a time for us where we're going to be much more likely to want to engage in certain activities with our, partner.
Right.
Where you move into your fall or your winter phase, it's going to be a time where we're going to feel more inward. We're maybe going to feel a little more irritable. And what's happening with our hormones at that time, it's very specific. It's your body saying, ooh, in case you're pregnant, we're going to protect a pregnancy. So we don't want you gallivanting all over the neighborhood right now, flirting with your hubby or doing this or doing that. We want you to be in a safe, slow environment. That's what your body wants of you. Right. And so you feel very differently. And sometimes you maybe, as a woman, will feel like, oh, that's the last thing I want to do right now. It has nothing to do with your love for your significant other. It's just what's going on biologically. So I like to use the example of food, exercise, and then I think sex is a good example too.
Of course. Yeah.
Again, and having a man understand that, Jeff knows when I say I'm in my winter phase, that's when I have, my period. The 2 days prior and the 2 days after, he knows, give me a little extra space because I need it. And it's not anything personal or against you. I just need a little bit of extra. And there's nothing sexier than when he gives me a little bit of extra space, and then my Beyonce hormone kicks in, and it just all works out in the long run for everyone.
Right, because a lot of static, I like to say, can happen from a man feeling rejected, right, when he wants it, and we're like, well, what's the deal here? Mm-hmm. And if we're not aware of this sort of thing, we just take it as a slight, mm-hmm. and then that obviously leads to so many other things,
yeah,
arguments and whatnot.
For sure. I think for centuries, there's sometimes this misalignment between men and women on that very topic. I think every relationship can relate to that, right? Mm-hmm. To a certain level. And so I find that's a really good example of how a man can support on that and in the understanding of what's going on biologically. Like, again, just to paint a picture hormonally, when you hit your winter phase or right before your period, your hormones hit rock bottom. So as a man, your hormones never hit rock bottom. Never. So we don't have. So
they're always up here.
Well, you have little dips and peaks in your hormones, but it's not quite as. You have to remember that women were built to procreate, carry babies, right?
What about the women who don't feel this desire to procreate? I have a few friends and they're I never want kids.
Me too.
What's the word on that?
But sorry, your hormones, there's no, I don't mean this in a disrespectful way. 100% I honor that. I think there's women that do and there's women that don't, and it doesn't take away from you being a woman. And you can do beautiful things whether you decide to be a parent or not be a parent. But your hormones are built your hormones are built to procreate, period, whether you want it or not. Right. So your hormones are still acting that way. There's no signal from your brain to say, hormones, I don't want to procreate, so I don't want you to create estrogen and testosterone during ovulation. It's still happening.
Is there a way to manage hormones that is this is a weird question, I guess, but are you aware of any, because you said you can't fight it at all, right? Do you think they'll ever come up with some sort of pill, or is there a pill or some kind of chemical that they use? Am I totally...
The pill.
There you go.
Birth control pill.
There you go.
No, I love the question. I love that you feel comfortable enough to ask those questions. And I feel like I have Caesar stuff in my teeth.
Celery. Yeah.
So, yes, the pill. I mean, birth control pill.
What does that do exactly then?
Here's exactly what it does. It cuts off the communication between your ovaries and your brain. So what happens is at all times your ovaries and the hormones because there's hormones for all sorts of things in our bodies. I'm only talking about reproductive hormones right now, right?
Right.
So the hormones are communicating to your brain, and your brain's communicating to your ovaries, and there's having this lovely conversation, and everything's kind of going hunky-dory. When you take the pill, it cuts off that communication. The other thing that it does is, even if you are, not to get into tons of detail, but even if you are, quote unquote, kind of getting a period, you're not really getting a period because you're not ovulating. They're called withdrawal bleeds. So long story short, the pill, the birth control, there's a time and a place for it. And I'm not, I think you need to make your own decision. I think there's not enough information out there about it, but there is a time and a place for it. But it does just cut off that communication, and it can throw your hormones for a little bit of a loop, especially when you go off of it.
Right. What about long-term use of the pill? What's the story with that? Because, anytime there's long-term use of anything, there's some sort of an effect. Do you know what the answer is to that?
I don't know.
Have you seen any studies or?
Yeah, there's more studies that are happening now, finally. I mean, a whole nother topic we could go down is the medical community and how slow it's been to kind of catch up in regards to women's health. Mm-hmm. Because we're very complicated. Like, most research is done on a man, and then they take that and they kind of dilute it to put it into like, okay, this is probably how it impacts a woman. But they're not actually doing the studies on a woman, especially in childbearing years, because it's just too complicated.
What type of studies exactly?
Just all sorts of studies on how medication impacts you, studies on, all sorts of things, diseases. It wasn't until don't quote me on this, it was in the 90s, mm-hmm. that they actually passed a law to say, okay, we actually need to start doing some of these medical research studies on women. Back in the 70s, they said, it's just too complicated, especially as a woman in her childbearing years. There's too much change going on with her hormones. We can't find like a benchmark to measure against. Right. So we're going to study men. It's easier. I call it lazy medicine, but that might be a little controversial. So anyways, we've come a long way in that. But so I think because of that, we're doing more research on pill and long-term effects of the pill. So I'm not a doctor. I mean, I don't know all the answers on that. But what I do, I know a couple things, and I know them intuitively. I think, like you said, anytime you put something somewhat forward into your body that is stopping communication, it's going to have some sort of impact when you go off of it.
Okay.
I think the other challenge is it's the answer that a lot of doctors take when there's other issues. I think the last stat I saw that was 60% of the women on the pill are not actually on the pill to prevent pregnancy. So it's very effective to prevent pregnancy, and you can weigh the pros and cons and make a decision if that's what you need it for. But a lot of young girls are being prescribed the pill for acne and issues with their skin, for painful periods, for irregular periods, and they're being put on at a very young age. And then when they come off of it, there's been studies around having issues with getting pregnant and lots of other issues. There's been a real link lately on mental health and the pill. So yeah, I mean, we could talk for hours about that. But.
Right. So how young, like 13?
Yeah, 13, 14.
Hello? You want to come in? Come on in.
Are you ready?
Yeah, sure. Come on in. Why not?
We're talking about the pill.
Talking about the pill. So come on in. You going to bring Jeff?
Sure.
All right. The significant others are going to join us. Right. So listen, where can people find you, Sarah Morden?
The best place is on Instagram, probably. I am Sarah Morden.
Okay. Oh, right on. Thanks so much, Sarah, and Jeff, and Tiffany, as always, for being amazing and tolerating my podcast here. All right. Cheers.
Thank you. Cheers.